Information Act request, as did CNN. And then when they were denied, they took it a step further and they went to court. Now, resolution of that today. And it's very interesting why the video is now being released by the U.S. government. And largely that is because the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui is now over. They didn't want to release it during those trial proceedings, believing it would prejudice the case. Now that that's all over with, they are going ahead, and the federal government within the hour will make this video now available. It is expected that the video will show for the first time a more discernible image, if you will, of Flight 77 hitting the building.
Yeah, Barbara, let me just jump in here for a second. Just to be clear, this is not the video we're talking about.
No,
this is video of our own coverage from 9/11.
Right, Darren. Yeah. To be clear, this is what we, of course, call file right. video.
Okay.
This is the aftermath within moments and hours on that day of what happened here in the Pentagon. That is the attack site. But what we are going to see from this release of video is surveillance cameras that were in the Pentagon parking lot that were rolling at the time. It will be a somewhat grainy image, but it will show Flight 77 and the impact into the side of the building. We have seen some of this before, but we've never really seen the discernible image of the actual aircraft hitting the building. And what we may see within the hour are the first images of the aircraft that we will actually see hitting the Pentagon, Darren.
It makes you wonder for a minute, stop and think about the families.
Indeed. Let us remember 184 victims of that terrible attack. People who follow this issue have certainly known that this surveillance video was out there. One of the interesting mysteries, however, is whether or not there is additional video out there from surveillance cameras that were in other buildings, other areas surrounding the Pentagon. There's been an awful lot of talk about it. We are not sure what we will see within the hour from this release of video. We believe it will only be very similar to what we've seen before. But of course, this also is expected to put to rest some of the internet chatter, some of the sort of fringe comments that have been out on the internet for years now about whether or not a plane really hit this building. And of course, a plane did hit this building, Darren.
We should see the pictures for ourselves very soon. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you.
That is now over, and now today they are going to release these two tapes. I have seen both tapes. They are from security cameras in the parking lot of the Pentagon. Now, one of the angles is exactly the same as the angle we see in the images that Fox obtained back in early 2002. As you take a look at them here, these are still shots from that same.
He's appealing to
stills. There are other stills that this security camera takes. You know, it's a security camera much like you see in the 7-Eleven or any place. It takes about a shot every half second. So in these shots, the one that is closer, a different angle than this, you do see a much clearer shot of the nose cone of American Airlines Flight 77 as it hits, right before it hits the Pentagon. Then you see a blur, and then you see the fireball you're looking at now on the screen. Of course, this comes as many conspiracy theorists said that there was never a plane that hit the Pentagon. There have been all kinds of rumors on the internet saying that it was everything from a conspiracy by the U.S. government to the Israelis. Pentagon officials call that all ludicrous, and they point out today that this is a sensitive day for the 184 families, the total number of people killed both on the plane and inside the Pentagon as these videos come out. Again, we should have them within the next 20 or so minutes. They were being released by the Department of Justice first to Judicial Watch, and then they will be put out to everyone by the Department of Defense at 2 p.m. We hope to get the tapes sometime in your hour, and once we get them, we'll show them here.
Brett, just a quick question. Judicial Watch originally wanted video surveillance tape from several different locations, and Bill Hemmer was talking about this earlier, but I want you to clarify this. There was a Sheraton Pentagon, a local gas station, a Citgo, I think it was. What's the status with those videotapes, if there even was any?
Yeah, right now there are no videotapes of other places other than these security camera videos from the Pentagon, as far as we know. We understand that the request went out for the Sheraton, which is right across the street. They didn't have an angle that looked exactly at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
The Citgo didn't either, and the Department of Transportation, while they had a camera on that very angle, it did not record. It's only a live camera for traffic updates. So those tapes, as far as we know, never materialized, and these are the only two angles showing the plane hitting.
Brad, but like you said, the conspiracy theorists will probably use that too. What happened to the Citgo tape and the Sheraton National tape and things like that?
Yeah, frankly, I don't think that there was a camera exactly on the angle of the plane hitting. And as you look at this area, it's not exactly lined up with either location.
Okay, the minute you get it, let us know. Thanks, Brad.
You got it.
Thanks, Brett. So why did the government keep this tape under wraps for so long, Michael?
Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Napolitano was here to answer that question. Judicial Watch and some other outlets kind of led the charge on this. Tell us about the Freedom of Information Act and their request.
Well, the Freedom of Information Act basically allows a citizen to require the government to release documents that are in the government's possession that are not classified. Now, this document was originally classified. This tape was originally classified because we didn't know if it was a military attack. We didn't know what the nature of it was. At some point, it lost that classification, was handed over to the Defense Department, which wanted to keep it out of the public domain for fear that Zacarias Moussaoui's lawyers might say, you are inflaming the potential jurors, because they're all coming from the area around the Pentagon, that part of Virginia where the Pentagon is located, by showing this tape. So rather than giving his lawyers the handle on that argument, they kept the tape secret.
So what kind of implications does this tape now being released have for other lawsuits that maybe have been filed or may someday be filed?
Well, I haven't seen it, but going on the basis of Brett's description of what he saw, it establishes definitively that this was the United flight that crashed into the Pentagon, that the conspiracy theorists have no basis to make an argument to the contrary, and any litigation that has been held up because lawyers on both sides, say for the airlines or for those who didn't accept the government's buyout and want to file a lawsuit against the airlines, are waiting to see this tape.
Right.
They can now have it. In a couple of minutes, it'll be in the public domain.
Now, the Judicial Watch, I believe it was back in February, well, I can't remember the exact date, but they said, this theory that the DOD doesn't want this released because the Zacarias Moussaoui trial is still going on, had no legal basis.
I agree with Judicial Watch. It really didn't. I mean, how many times did we see the World Trade Towers fall? Thousands and thousands of times. And no one was able to argue that those tapes were being run by the government so as to pollute a jury pool against the only person charged. Us back to Juliet's original question. Why did the government not want these tapes revealed? Well, sometimes the government is just worried about public anxiety or public overreaction. I think they should have been revealed right away, just like the tapes that the news networks took of the World Trade Towers collapse.
And just very quickly, and Mike actually touched on this, but just the Freedom of Information Act. Explain to our viewers exactly what that is and why people are allowed to go after certain information that sometimes isn't available right away.
The Freedom of Information Act was enacted by the Congress when it was felt that the executive branch of the government, the President, the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, for example, were keeping documents away from the public. So the public policy of the country is, if the document is not classified, does not pertain to the personnel records of an employee of the government, it's available for anyone in the government to get. You just have to write a letter, mention the act, send in the cost of copying it and the cost of the mailing it back to you, and eventually you should get the document you want. Though sometimes you may have to sue for it, as Judicial Watch did when the government resists you, but you should win that lawsuit.
Judge, hang in there just a second.
Sure.
We're going to bring in another guest.
Former Governor of Illinois and also a member of the 9/11 Commission, James Thompson, is joining us today. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Just your reaction to the fact that this tape is now finally being released publicly.
Well, I think the American public is entitled to every single piece of information they can have about the attacks of 9/11, and so I think it's a good thing that this tape is being shown. I don't understand how it would have inflamed the Moussaoui jury, even if it had been released before then. The Moussaoui jury heard much more horrific testimony than this tape. And of course, movies like United 93 are out there and circulating, and I don't think there's anybody in the world with access to media that hasn't seen the plane crashes either on the trade towers or on the Pentagon.
As a member of the 9/11 Commission, though, did you see the tapes?
Yes,
You
we
have
did
seen
see
them?
the tapes.
And was there
Yes.
ever discussed in the Commission's meetings any ideas of the conspiracy?
No.
Okay.
I mean, conspiracy theorists have abounded since the publication of our report. I think there was a report in the London Times several weeks ago, but there are a lot of crackpots out there, especially those who fasten on to events of national and international tragedy, and you've got to look at their allegations and say that's impossible. So they're wrong on this one.
As a commission member, you've come in contact with some of the family members of the victims of 9/11. What do you think they feel about this tape being released right now? Do you think that based on what you've known and all the people that you've talked to, that they are in support of this being released?
My guess is that a majority of the families now understand the families, all human beings, all separate personalities, weren't always unanimous on every issue, but I think it's appropriate that the American people be reminded from time to time about the horror of that day, and be reminded about the fact that we need to remain vigilant. We need to take the rest of the steps that the Commission recommended, like the reform of congressional oversight.
Right.
And I think the families would say, yes, the more reference, the better, because we don't want anybody to forget how that day impacted the lives of every American, not just the families of those who lost their lives. And I think the families were the ones who insisted most of all on the formation of our commission, and our public hearings were most supportive of us, and I think continue to be supportive of any efforts that will keep the American people aware and interested in the events of that day, and interested in how the U.S. government, whether it's the Bush administration or the Congress, has followed up.
Governor, just real quickly here, because you're on the 9/11 Commission, and again, we're waiting for the release of these, and the surveillance tape from the Pentagon, the parking garage, and two different angles from the parking garage. We just want to make sure, did you ever see anything from the Sheraton National surveillance camera, the Citgo gas station, the Department of Transportation from the state of Virginia? Do those tape exist? And if they do, did you ever see any of it?
I don't remember the individual tapes. All I know is that whatever information was available anywhere in any government or in any private sector, we saw.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate you joining us
All right.
today.
Thank
And if you
you.
have any comments
Hello,
on this
Judge.
or any questions, he says hello.
Hi, Judge.
Good to see you, Governor.
Corsica, what did Genevieve think happened to her mom?
Well, she was informed that her mother was killed in an automobile accident very early on, back in 1976.
Oh, my God.
He has fled to a number of jurisdictions and is using an alias, and that's quite frankly what the difficulty was here. But due to Sergeant Worth's dogged determination, he finally located the daughter, and hopefully we'll begin a unification process.
And Sergeant Wirtz, that's the question for you. How did you locate her? Was there some sort of tip?
Well, back last fall, the Marshal Service began working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on open parental abduction cases, as I understood. And I was contacted by a Deputy Marshal, Nittifer, who had been assigned the case out of the Detroit office of the Marshals. I took our rather extensive files down there, and we kind of compared notes, and I showed him what I had garnered thus far. And last Wednesday, information came in that he relayed to me that enabled me, based on my knowledge of the case, to connect enough of the dots to identify both the missing daughter and her father.
Now, Detective Genevieve, do you mind telling us what her first name is now?
We can just use Genevieve.
Or Genevieve, okay. And what's her reaction to all of this? Is she just outraged? Well, I'll let you. What's her reaction to this?
She's devastated. She's extremely upset, obviously, for, as we would be. Though on one side of the coin, you'd think.
Next, we are awaiting video just released by the Department of Defense of Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon on 9/11. It could come at any moment. We're watching for it, and we will bring that straight to you.
Okay. And this is a Dayside Fox News alert. We are still awaiting the video from Flight 77, American Airlines Flight 77, that hit the Pentagon back on September the 11th, 2001.
Fox National security correspondent Brett Baer has seen the tape. He's live at the Pentagon with an update. Brett, any idea when we're going to see this?
Well, it should be a matter of minutes. We understand the Department of Justice was scheduled to give it to Judicial Watch. That's as the result of that Freedom of Information Act we told you about and lawsuit. That was supposed to happen at the top of the 1 o'clock hour. Now we're being told that the Department of Defense will put it on its website at the top of the 2 o'clock hour, but we're hoping to get it from Judicial Watch prior to that. Again, I have seen these two different videotapes, two different security camera angles, basically right outside the Pentagon where Flight 77 hit the structure on 9/11, about 9:30 in the morning. One of the angles we have seen before. Fox obtained a series of stills in early 2002 showing, we have 5 of the stills from that camera angle showing the plane, but you really can't see it clearly in the series of stills, and then you see a fireball hitting the Pentagon, and that sparked all kinds of controversy and conspiracy theories that there wasn't a plane. The second angle that you will see today is from a closer camera in that very parking lot, a security camera, and it does take the shots about every half second or so. But in the first shot, about a minute into the tape, you do see the nose cone of the plane very clearly, much more clearly than you did on those series of stills that we saw before. The second camera is that very angle that we have seen. So again, there's probably still going to be some conspiracy theorists out there that say this doesn't prove it, but for the Pentagon, these are the only 2 angles of this attack that they have.
All right, Brett Baer, thanks very much. And once again, we are waiting for this tape, and when we have it, we will bring it to you right here on Fox News Channel. In the meantime, Tom Bortner survived the 9/11 Pentagon attack. He was on the 2nd floor when the plane hit the building, and he's joining us right now. Thanks very much for being here today. Very quickly, before I get your reaction to the tape being released, tell us about the day that this happened. You were on the 2nd floor, as I just mentioned, and what happened?
We were in the middle of a conference, and we hadn't heard any news from the crashes into the World Trade Center. So we were oblivious to that breaking news. Suddenly the building trembled greatly, and we found ourselves, some diving on the floor, some being knocked to the floor as some of the pieces came off the walls and the ceiling, and a bookcase collapsed.
Tom, I mean, we keep talking about these conspiracy theorists, and you're on the 2nd floor. I mean, right under where this happened. Are you surprised that people would doubt that a very large American Airlines plane slammed into the Pentagon?
I am surprised by that.
And what do you suppose, what's that stem from? The fact that we just haven't seen a frame, a video, or a still that actually shows most of the plane?
Well, the nose of the plane approaching the building and then the subsequent fireball, I think, is enough to convince anyone.
Tom, we've got some people who have been writing into Dayside, and they're wondering, they're saying, look, the Pentagon should be one of the most tightly secured buildings in the world, much less the country. They're surprised that there aren't more videotapes and surveillance tapes that would have shown this plane hitting the Pentagon. What do you have to say to that?
I think the speed of the plane is what really prevented it, because the technical part of the camera framing, and because it has to be on 24 hours a day, I think prohibited a clear picture. If the timing had been slightly different, I think the plane would have been directly in the picture.
So, Tom, again, this is going to be released in just a few minutes, and we're going to show it here on Fox News Channel. When you hear the discussion back and forth, should the tape be released or not, do you think it's important to document this even further?
I think that it's irrelevant to what happened. I think that it's conclusive that that plane hit the Pentagon, and I don't think the tape really adds or detracts from that.
Yeah. Do you still work at the Pentagon?
Yes, sir.
And where's your office now?
The office I work for is physically in the Pentagon. Because of relocations at that time, I'm still located physically in Crystal City nearby.
Yeah.
Will you be watching the tape when it's released?
I'm sure I'll take a look just to see what it shows.
All right, Tom Bortner, thanks very much for sharing your story today. Appreciate it.
Let's get straight to the newsroom. Betty Wynn's working a developing story for us. Betty.
Yeah, Kira, Judicial Watch, which is a public interest group, it has been able to get some tapes from the Department of Justice. Now, these tapes are of American Airlines Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon on September 11th. There was a lot that went into getting these tapes, and we're still waiting for that to be posted on the Judicial Watch website. At least 2 tapes are going to be released. There are 2 different angles from security cameras at the same Pentagon checkpoints. But here's what we have to show you right now. CNN was the first to obtain and broadcast still frames from one of these videos back in March 2002. That is the video right there of the plane that hit the Pentagon on September 11th. Now, we're going to get today video of this occurrence from the Justice Department. This video will be a more complete version of those frames that you just saw there. Now, back in 2002, I have to tell you that CNN filed a Freedom of Information request with the Justice Department for this very video. That was denied. CNN did not appeal. But in 2004, Judicial Watch filed another Freedom of Information request with the Justice Department. That was appealed. A lawsuit was entered after that. And then the Justice Department said they cannot send those tapes out simply because the Zakaria Moussaoui trial was coming up, and therefore they didn't want to taint the jury. Well, now, Kira, as we know, that trial is over with. Moussaoui was convicted, sentenced to life in prison. Now those tapes can be revealed, and today, any minute now, it was supposed to happen at 1 o'clock Eastern. These tapes were going to be posted on Judicial Watch's website. We're still waiting for that to happen, but we do have some more information that maybe we'll see on the website, maybe we won't. Back in 2002, CNN correspondents say that sources say the FBI confiscated hotel security camera video, which also captured this attack. Now, we don't know if that's what's going to be released by the Justice Department. All we know is the video that the Justice Department is releasing involves the tapes that were captured at different angles of the Pentagon. So we're waiting to see what that video shows, but it says a lot of exactly about what happened. You know, there's all these conspiracy theories out there. Obviously, is going to solve a lot of that, but a lot of people are thinking about the families too, those victims' families, and how these tapes are going to affect them. Tapes that will be released any minute now, Kira.
And as soon as we get those tapes and see them, we will get reaction from those family members and victims from those attacks, those that survived. Betty, thanks so much. Let's get straight to CNN senior Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre working a developing story for us. Of course, Jamie, it's the release of that videotape from 9/11 of that plane hitting the Pentagon. Haven't had a chance to see it. Of course, a lot of conspiracy theories surfaced since not being able to see that videotape, and now that might change.
Well, you know, what we'll be seeing, Kira, is a longer, more complete version of the images first broadcast by CNN back in March of 2002. This is video from a security camera that was at the corner of one of the entrances to the Pentagon that captured the plane hitting the side of the building. Initially, we obtained only 5 still frames from that video, but now, after a lawsuit by the public interest group Judicial Watch, and the end of the Zakaria Moussaoui trial, the government is going to release the full, more complete video in which you'll see a little more clearly, but perhaps still not enough to convince all conspiracy theorists, the plane actually slamming into the side of the Pentagon, American Airlines Flight 77. You can see it in these still images, again, that we broadcast originally back in 2002, but it's very indistinct, and that's helped fuel some of the conspiracy theories, people saying that perhaps a missile hit the Pentagon, or that the Pentagon was destroyed by an explosion deliberately set by the U.S. government. Of course, having been there on September 11th, having seen the plane wreckage and photographed it myself personally, I can tell you that that's nonsense. But nevertheless, those kinds of theories exist on the internet. And one of the reasons that groups like Judicial Watch and CNN, which, by the way, filed a FOIA, Freedom of Information request for this back in 2002, have been wanting to get the full video out. Now, when we get it, and it will be posted on the Pentagon's website as well as released by the Department of Justice, you'll see 2 angles that are very similar, both from camera angles that are on from the same location, 2 slightly different angles. One of them, you'll see the nose of the plane that looks a little more distinct. Another one, you see basically a white flash go by of the plane before it hits the building. And we don't think these are all the images, by the way, of American Airlines Flight 77 that day. CNN reported back in 2002 that a nearby hotel video surveillance camera also captured part of the incident, although not from a very good angle. That tape was also confiscated by law enforcement authorities, and we don't know if that will be part of something that will be released or whether that tape will ever be released. Kira?
Jamie, you were working that day. What do you remember? Where were you? And did you make your way over to that area where the plane did hit?
Yeah, I sure did. In fact, one of the interesting things was I was in the Pentagon, and of course I didn't actually feel the plane hit or know that it hit until I actually saw it on CNN, amazingly enough. My office was so far on the other side of the building, and we were so involved with what was going on in New York, that the first word I got was when my producer at the time, Chris Plant, arrived just as the plane had hit. He called in on his mobile phone. In fact, he was the first to report a plane that hit the Pentagon just about 2 minutes after it hit. And that's when I discovered the plane hit the Pentagon, when I looked up and saw it on CNN.
And so once you were able to do that, did you make your way over to that area, or were they cordoning it off so you couldn't get through?
No, I did. You were able to get pretty close for a while. Eventually, they cleared off the scene. As I said, I had a camera with me. I took pictures of some of the wreckage, some of the parts of the fuselage, a part of the cockpit, until they told us we had to move back away from the scene. I saw thousands of shards of metal, of the pieces of the plane, all over the driveway. I didn't pick up any of them or touch any of them, but I saw them everywhere, and again took some pictures of them. So there's no doubt that the plane hit the Pentagon. I mean, for no other reason than we know the plane took off at Dulles Airport, and people on the plane, you know, made cell phone calls. We know a plane hit the Pentagon. It's just interesting to see the documentary evidence. Some people just don't believe it until they actually see it.
Well, and we'll show it to viewers as soon as we get it, Jamie, which could be any time now. Sure appreciate you helping us out. We'll talk again.
Quite welcome.
Thank you. And once again, as Mike just mentioned, we are waiting for that tape of Flight 97, the flight that crashed into the Pentagon. There is video that has been released to Judicial Watch. They sued under the Freedom of Information Act, and we should be seeing that tape anytime. Please stay with us here on Day 7. Be right back. This is a Fox News alert. We are awaiting the release of a tape on a plane, Flight 97, hitting the Pentagon on 9/11. There was a lawsuit filed under the Freedom of Information Act. Brett Baer is standing by live, and he's got the latest on this. Brett?
Okay, Juliet, Mike, we understand we have obtained the tape, and we are in the process of queuing that up. This is the end of the one angle of the plane, and maybe we can recue that, control room. This is the best angle, the closest angle to the Pentagon. This is from the closer security camera in the parking lot. And I tell you what, let's see if we can rewind it a bit.
Okay, here,
this is the one.
This is the original one we've seen for quite
we've
a few
seen
months
this
now.
still many times, and you will see another angle from this very camera. But as we rewind that tape, you can see the nose cone of the plane. If you watch here closely on the right side of your screen, you will see the nose cone from this security camera. And we might have to slow it down even more. It is one still that I have seen very clearly on the nose cone from this camera angle. That's the closest we get to American Airlines Flight 77 actually seeing the plane. You can see the glare on the tape there. It comes in right about that spot, and we'll single that out and get it for you. The other angle on the other tape is the angle that we've seen before, which is that pulled back security camera, and it's roughly the same. You see a flash, you see a blur, and then you see the explosion at the Pentagon. What is tough to see here is that this is a security camera that takes about a frame every half second or so, and you can't really get a clear glimpse of the plane from either of these angles.
Judge Napolitano has rejoined us, and Judge, we're all watching this at the same time,
right.
And all of us, and including I think a lot of the audience members, are kind of thinking, well, it doesn't look that much different from the original that we saw many, many years ago.
Well,
Why
no.
would they have been holding this back?
You know, sometimes people in government are a little too protective of the government, and they forget that we all have the right to know what the government's doing. Of course, we have hindsight, and we can now say, well, why didn't we have this 4.5 years ago? We should have, and that's what a judge did rule when the judge ordered that these be released.
Okay, now, Brett, that's what you're working on now, is try to get that one frame where you see the cone, the nose cone?
Yeah, if you take it back and you go frame by frame, now this is the other angle. Of course, we've seen these stills before. If you go frame by frame on the closer camera, you can see the nose cone. I've seen it on the frame. But again, overall, this is underwhelming for somebody who watches this, because we've seen this angle before, just haven't seen this many frames of it. So for the conspiracy theorists out there, there are probably going to be people saying this doesn't prove anything. But as we get the frame that shows the nose cone, we'll get it to you and put it on the air.
Right, Brett, where are we rolling this? Are we rolling this out of D.C.?
Out of D.C., yeah.
Out of D.C., okay, so maybe when we go back to the still or something, our technician can actually just cue it up physically on the tape machine to that frame, and then we'll take that frame. But again, you're right, Judge. I mean, the conspiracy theorists are going to wonder what that big white glare is on the right.
No, this is going to cause more conspiracies.
Dayside at foxnews.com. I'm sure we've already received a few, and hopefully
Brett has better eyes than all of us, and he's seen what we have not yet seen.
Well, I'll tell you, as we go frame by frame, Judge, you'll see in the first frame one piece of the nose cone. First, you see a little piece of dirt fly up. It appears that the plane hits before the Pentagon, and then you'll see just one frame, a piece of the nose cone. Then you'll see that blur, that big white blur that you just saw there, and then the explosion. So. We'll go frame by frame. We'll get it to you here momentarily.
Brett, I've never really asked this question. Does the plane slightly hit the ground first?
That's what most people here believe, is that it struck the ground first as it skidded into the Pentagon. Now, it's important to remember that this plane, they say the fuselage went all the way through 3 rings of the Pentagon. There are 5 rings here. It went all the way through to the C ring, and as you looked at the hole it created, it was a large hole that went through 3 rings. You remember seeing the outside shots of all of the crumbling floors, but inside the hole was actually very the size of the actual fuselage of American Flight 77. So again, we've said this from the beginning. This is a security camera. It's not great video, and we've been saying it really since we saw it first earlier today.
Brett Baer, thanks very much. We appreciate it. And we will obviously have continuing coverage right here on Fox News Channel all throughout the day on the release of this video.
Going to take a break here real quickly, and we'll get reorganized and come right back. Don't go away.
Let's get started. CNN senior Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre working a developing story for us. Of course, Jamie, it's the release of that videotape from 9/11 of that plane hitting the Pentagon. Haven't had a chance to see it. Of course, a lot of conspiracy theories surfaced since not being able to see that videotape, and now that might change.
Well, you know, what we'll be seeing, Kira, is a longer, more complete version of the images first broadcast by CNN back in March of 2002. This is video from a security camera that was at the corner of one of the entrances to the Pentagon that captured the plane hitting the side of the building. Initially, we obtained only 5 still frames from that video, but now, after a lawsuit by the public interest group Judicial Watch, and the end of the Zacarias Moussaoui trial, the government is going to release the full, more complete video in which you'll see a little more clearly, but perhaps still not enough to convince all conspiracy theorists, the plane actually slamming into the side of the Pentagon, American Airlines Flight 77. You can see it in these still images, again, that we broadcast originally back in 2002, but it's very indistinct, and that's helped fuel some of the conspiracy theories, people saying that perhaps a missile hit the Pentagon, or that the Pentagon was destroyed by an explosion deliberately set by the U.S. government. Of course, having been there on September 11th, having seen the plane wreckage and photographed it myself personally, I can tell you that that's nonsense. But nevertheless, those kinds of theories exist on the internet. And one of the reasons that groups like Judicial Watch and CNN, which, by the way, filed a FOIA, Freedom of Information request for this back in 2002, have been wanting to get the full video out. Now, when we get it, and it will be posted on the Pentagon's website as well as released by the Department of Justice, you'll see 2 angles that are very similar, both from camera angles that are on from the same location, 2 slightly different angles. One of them, you'll see the nose of the plane that looks a little more distinct. Another one, you see basically a white flash go by of the plane before it hits the building. And we don't think these are all the images, by the way, of American Airlines Flight 77 that day. CNN reported back in 2002 that a nearby hotel video surveillance camera also captured part of the incident, although not from a very good angle. That tape was also confiscated by law enforcement authorities, and we don't know if that will be part of something that will be released or whether that tape will ever be released. Kira?
Jamie, you were working that day. What do you remember? Where were you? And did you make your way over to that area where the plane did hit?
Yeah, I sure did. In fact, one of the interesting things was I was in the Pentagon, and of course I didn't actually feel the plane hit or know that it hit until I actually saw it on CNN, amazingly enough. My office was so far on the other side of the building, and we were so involved with what was going on in New York, that the first word I got was when my producer at the time, Chris Plant, arrived just as the plane had hit. He called in on his mobile phone. In fact, he was the first to report a plane that hit the Pentagon just about 2 minutes after it hit. And that's when I discovered the plane that hit the Pentagon, when I looked up and saw it on CNN.
And so once you were able to do that, did you make your way over to that area, or were they cordoning it off so you couldn't get through?
No, I did. You were able to get pretty close for a while. Eventually, they cleared off the scene. As I said, I had a camera with me. I took pictures of some of the wreckage, some of the parts of the fuselage, a part of the cockpit, until they told us we had to move back away from the scene. I saw thousands of shards of metal, of the pieces of the plane, all over the driveway. I didn't pick up any of them or touch any of them, but I saw them everywhere, and again took some pictures of them. So there's no doubt that the plane hit the Pentagon. I mean, for no other reason than we know the plane took off at Dulles Airport, and people on the plane, you know, made cell phone calls. We know a plane hit the Pentagon. It's just interesting to see the documentary evidence. Some people just don't believe it until they actually see it.
Well, and we'll show it to viewers as soon as we get it, Jamie, which could be any time now. Sure appreciate you helping us out. We'll talk again.
Quite welcome.
And on top of the news today, reliving September 11th, another wave of memories of that day as an organization called Judicial Watch is releasing never-before-seen footage of American Flight 77 crashing into the Pentagon nearly 5 years ago. Let's go live to the Pentagon now, where the national security correspondent for Fox News, Brett Baer, of course, is standing by as we wait for this full release. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Martha. This official release comes today after a Freedom of Information Act request and then following lawsuit by Judicial Watch trying to get the release of these two videotapes from two different security cameras outside the Pentagon on 9/11. The Pentagon at the time said they didn't want to release them because it was part of an investigation into Zacarias Moussaoui. As you're now looking, that is the angle you're very familiar with. It's an angle we've seen before from still shots we obtained back in 2002. That is the first video that you see from the back angle security camera. Again, it's every half second or so on the frames from these security cameras, and you don't get a good sense of a plane hitting. You just see the explosion. As you go to the first camera, the closer camera, you'll see a sunspot in the screen. If we go to that videotape, before that, you'll see, if you can slow it down, and we're working on getting the still, every frame slowed down. Pentagon officials believe there is a little tip that you can see of the nose cone, then a blur, and then into the Pentagon, the explosion. Again, overall, people looking at this tape would probably be underwhelmed. However, it's the only two video camera angles that the Pentagon says it has of that event on 9/11. There you see the sunspot and a still shot from that closer camera. At one point, you do see a shadow, and then you see a small tip, according to Pentagon officials, and I saw it earlier on a still shot, and then a blur into the Pentagon. Again, it's not a definite impact that you can see clearly of American Airlines Flight 77, and it is the result of this request, Freedom of Information Act request and lawsuit, that this has come out today. And of course, it's important to remember the 184 people who died that day, both in the Pentagon and on the plane. Of course, there have been many conspiracy theories that there was not a plane that impacted this building. This is as close as they can get to visual evidence, because other camera angles haven't panned out. And likely, after seeing this tape, those conspiracy theories will likely continue. Martha?
All right, Brett, thank you very much. Brett Baer at the Pentagon. Now for more on this newly released video of the 9/11 Pentagon attack, I'm joined by a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator George Allen, a Republican from Virginia. Welcome, Senator. It's always good to have you with us.
Thank you, Martha.
You know, every time we get sort of another piece of information from that day, another look at a piece of video as we did today, it brings back the memories of that attack. And I think it's important in many ways that we do look at it and that we do remember what happened that day. What do you remember about that attack, and in particular, being in Washington, about the attack on the Pentagon?
Well, I remember all the confusion and the shock and the horror, and everyone on that day when they got home, and the first thing that was on everyone's minds, how are my children, how are my loved ones? And we all hugged our family members tighter. We had just moved up the Allen family to Northern Virginia, and one of the kids who became friends with with our children, his father was on that Flight 77. And so that young boy, Nick, was one who right off the bat we all ached for. And I think the whole family, all families, were adopting those who lost loved ones on that morning. Just last week in Prince William County, a memorial was dedicated to the 22 people from Prince William County, which is a little bit outside of the Washington area, who died on that day. 19 of them were in the Pentagon. The people who went to work that day or got on a plane were going about their lives. This is going to bring back a lot of emotions. I saw it just last week, and we'll never forget. In fact, I keep on a mirror on my dresser the picture of Chick Burlingame, the captain of American Flight 77, that his brothers and sisters gave me with a poem, which the point is he did not die, and we should never forget. And it's not that he didn't die physically. They're there still with us in the spirit, and the winds and the birds and the beauty and the freedoms we cherish in this country.
I think so many of us have some connection to a person or a memory or something from that day. And it brings me to my next question for you. As we get closer to the confirmation process for General Hayden, what do you think will happen in terms of the, the discussion and the tension that's going on over this NSA program, and how important do you think it is to fighting the war on terror?
Well, I think it's important for the American people to know what efforts are being done. Now, to some extent, you don't want our enemies knowing what we're doing. You don't want to tip them off on how we may be intercepting their finances, their communications, or any of their plots. This film being released here will remind everyone who we're fighting. We're fighting vile, hate-filled jihadists who would love to hit this country again. And they can count on me to be one voice up here in Washington. It's not going to play partisan games, but it's going to be working to make sure that it doesn't happen again. General Hayden, I think, has exemplary credentials. He will be, of course, examined as to his capabilities, and I think that the American people want a fair hearing and ultimately a vote. And to the extent he can explain what we're doing as American leaders for the American people to protect us, to prevent another one of these catastrophic attacks ever hitting on our homeland again, I think the American people will want to see that action and not petty partisan bickering or sniping.
Well, I want to ask you a question about that. And first, I want to just point out, we've drawn a circle around the area that is the nose cone of that plane. And there's been a lot of speculation over these last years about whether or not that plane first hit the ground and skidded into and then exploded, going all the way into the third ring of the Pentagon. And you get a little bit of a look at that nose cone as it grounded along there. I just want to ask you one last question, Senator Allen. When you look at what we often see turn into grandstanding in some of these hearing processes, do you think that we're at greater danger for witnessing that during this hearing process for General Hayden because of, the NSA story that is on the front of every newspaper and news magazine in this country right now?
I suppose that is a possibility. Grandstanding in the Congress is not an uncommon practice, so that may happen. I would hope that the senators in the committee will act responsibly. And also think of the family members who are watching, in some cases, remembering the last seconds of life of their husband or wife or their son or their daughter or their father or their mother. And let's have a respectful approach to these hearings, because General Hayden and all the people working in our armed forces who are serving now overseas, those who are working in the CIA, Defense Intelligence, Customs, and also our allies in places such as Europe, are all working together to make sure that these sort of vile attacks don't happen. Let's have some sense of responsibility and decorum.
All right, Senator Allen, thank you. It's always good to talk to you.
Good to be with you,
Senator George Allen there. And This news just crossing the wires. You all remember the professor, Ward Churchill, who compared September 11th victims to Nazis. He has been undergoing an investigation in terms of his conduct in his research. And that investigation of this University of Colorado professor has found that he did indeed have serious cases of misconduct in his academic research. This comes from CU spokesman Barry Hartman, who says that one member of the 5-member investigative committee recommended that the ethnic studies professor Ward Churchill be fired. 4 others recommended that he be suspended based on their analysis of his academic research and several cases of what they are calling serious misconduct. So we have been watching this story ever since the beginning, and we'll continue to update you on what kind of action they decide to take at CU, Colorado University, against Ward Churchill. And we've just had a look at the video that is coming in and relives the shock and horror of that horrible day of September 11th. New images of the deadly attack on the Pentagon have just been released. We're live with that story. Right here, we're going to show you these images once again that really come from a day that indeed changed our world. Actual footage of Flight 77 as it hit the Pentagon. This video never seen by the public before. More on that straight ahead. All right, some news on Ward Churchill. A group of 5 on a committee at Colorado University have been evaluating this highly controversial professor who at one point compared September 11th victims to Nazis. They have been examining his methods of research. They have decided, 2 of them have recommended that because there are such serious cases of misconduct in his research that he should be suspended for pay without 2 years. 2 others recommending a 5-year suspension. The 5th says he should be dismissed. The committee's report found falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism in his scholarly work, also finding a serious deviation from accepted practices in reporting results from that research, and that Churchill was disrespectful of Indian oral traditions when discussing a smallpox epidemic that happened in 1837 in his essays and throughout the course of this investigation. So we're going to continue, of course, to stay on this story, which we've been on since the very beginning, of what will happen to this professor, Ward Churchill, as a result of this serious misconduct. Well, Bell South is firing back against a newspaper report that claims that the phone company handed over customer records to the feds. It all comes back to the domestic wiretapping program and how the NSA tried to root out terrorist plots in the United States. Brian Wilson joins us live with the latest on this fast-moving story. Hi, Brian.
Hey, Martha. President Bush today again insisted that the United States government is not monitoring domestic phone conversations without obtaining proper warrants.
I've been very clear about the principles and guidelines of any program that has been designed to protect the American people. I've also been clear about the fact that we do not listen to domestic phone calls without court approval, and that this government will continue to guard the privacy of the American people.
Well, that comment comes following recent reports in USA Today that some U.S. phone companies were providing phone call records to the National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland, so that they could use their supercomputers to scan the records for signs of terrorist activity. But one of the phone companies listed in the original USA Today story is now stating flatly it was not involved in such a program. Quote, this statement comes from Bell South. As a result of media reports that Bell South provided massive amounts of customer calling information under a contract with the NSA, the company conducted an internal review to determine the facts. Based on our review to date, we have confirmed no such contract exists, and we have not provided bulk customer calling records to the NSA. At the White House today, brand new spokesman Tony Snow said the Bush administration is still not confirming or denying the existence of such a program. But they did say that the appropriate Hill leaders have thoroughly been briefed on whatever it is the Bush administration is doing. Back to you, Martha.
All right, Brian, thank you very much. Well, you've heard it laid out. The battle lines are drawn as the debate is raging over the National Security Agency. We are now looking at some new pictures today as a backdrop that have been released of the Pentagon attack on September 11th. The president says the 9/11 attack is the very reason that surveillance programs were created in the first place. The battle lines are drawn as President Bush vows to protect Americans against another terror attack by working within the law. Joining me now, former Pennsylvania Congressman Republican Bob Walker and the Democratic National Committee Vice Chair Susan Turnbull. Welcome to both of you. You know, Susan, when you look at these new pictures, this new video that we've just received, and you see the nose of that plane hitting the ground as it skids toward the Pentagon, what goes through your mind? What do you remember about that day, and what do you think is important about remembering that day?
I actually remember listening to a reporter talking about it when the plane hit, and I also remember hearing the next day or a couple days later that people that I knew were actually on that plane. So it does hurt me right here when I watch that. But what it also does is it emboldens me, and I think a lot of people, to make sure that what we are going to do and what the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic leadership are going to do is going to stand as firm as we can to protect the American people, to make sure that we have real security, to make sure that hometown security is homeland security, and that in fact we take great cause and make sure that we do the right thing by having better port security, by having better response and following the 911 commission reports. Those are things that the Democrats want to do.
Bob, you know, what goes through your mind when you look at that video and you think about what's going on right now in terms of this NSA controversy? How should people sort of put those two things in context, do you think?
Well, what I'm reminded of is how sick we all felt about the fact that the United States could be so boldly attacked. And then as we found out the kinds of people that were behind these attacks, we were worried about just exactly what the future held. We learned from the 9/11 Commission that what happened was we had intelligence failures in the past, in large part because we decimated some of our ability to gather intelligence. What we have now is a president who is determined to use every legal means available to assure that we can have the intelligence that we need in order to defeat Al-Qaeda. That's what's been going on here, and the NSA program was done purely with legal means, and it is an aggressive program aimed at rooting out terrorists.
Susan, I can't help but think when I listen to the back and forth on this NSA debate that if, God forbid, you know, we were to witness another scene like we just all watched in that Pentagon video there, that people would be, you know, saying, how could we not have known that another plot was coming? And if you were to find out that terrorists were in this country, that they were speaking to each other, wouldn't you want to believe that your government would track them down and catch them?
Obviously, you would want to believe that our government would track them down and catch them. In fact, what the 911 Commission report said is that we did know, we had some reports about the potential of 911 occurring. What is important today, I think, more than anything, is that we believe, and I think that most people want to be confident in the future for our government. We have not been impressed with the intelligence operations. The thing that is going on right around now about the NSA, no one knows the true story, and the problem is that people have lost faith in their government because of that.
I just want to ask you, let me get back to the question that I asked you. And if you knew that scanning numbers, not numbers connected to a person's name or their social security number, but scanning numbers would help track down a terrorist plot in this country, wouldn't you support that?
I think, of course, that I would support that. But the question is that what's happening? And the response is that we don't know what's happening because we have not, this government and this intelligence community has had failings.
Bob for the 30 seconds. You know, does it matter that we don't know, Bob, or are there some things that we shouldn't know?
Well, there are some things we shouldn't know. The fact is we don't want all the American people to know exactly the way in which we're conducting these operations, because if they know, then the terrorists know, and the terrorists use that information to their own end. So we want to make certain that the right people know, that the people inside the intelligence committees of the Congress are kept well informed, and the President has been doing that. But we don't want to put out all the information because we don't want to give the terrorists a leg up.
All right, Susan.
But what we want to know, though, on the other hand, is that the intelligence is good and fair and straightforward. And we haven't seen that to date.
Well, that's exactly what the people on Capitol Hill do know, and they have been keeping track of it on a bipartisan basis.
We've got to go. I know we could keep going on this all afternoon, and it's a good debate to have. Bob Walker, Susan Turnbull, thank you very much.
Thank you.
right, to CNN Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre working that developing story that we've been telling you about, that videotape concerning the aircraft that hit the Pentagon back on 9/11. Jamie, it's finally been released.
Yes, that's right, Kira. This is, again, a more complete version of the 6 still frame images that CNN obtained unofficially back in March of 2002 and broadcast then. The full tape has been something the government has been holding as evidence in the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, but now that that trial is over, they've released the full video. And the video, which runs for a minute or so, shows what happens just before the impact and also the plane coming into the building. It's from 2 separate cameras, both at the same location at a Pentagon checkpoint entrance. And it's hard to see as we're playing it here. It's sort of stop-action video. Again, very similar to the still frames we saw before. But when you run the video back and stop it, at one point you can see what appears to be the nose of the plane just entering the frame. The very next frame, there's an explosion. And then in the second angle, which is taken from another camera a little bit lower down, you can see what appears to be a white flash that also looks like the plane. But again, it's not going to be distinct enough to convince conspiracy theorists who still question whether a plane actually hit the Pentagon. But for anyone with any common sense, and given all the other evidence we have, there's really no doubt that a plane hit the Pentagon. But the fact that the government was holding these videotapes from a security camera and not releasing was simply fueling suspicions around the world. And now, as a result of this lawsuit by Judicial Watch, a public interest group, asking for these tapes, and the fact that the Zacarias Moussaoui trial is over now, the government is releasing the tapes, and as well as releasing them from the Department of Justice, they're also being posted on the Pentagon's website. Kira?
Jamie McIntyre, thank you so much. Jamie, you were there at the Pentagon, and so was Admiral Timothy Keating. He was in the Pentagon's Navy Operations Center just moments before Flight 77 obliterated it. 24 people died in that room, and today Admiral Keating is at NORTHCOM NORAD watching the skies and keeping a close eye on the ground, specifically the border debate flaring in Washington. He's on the phone with me right now. And Admiral, I first want to get your response to this videotape. I know it brings back a lot of extreme memories for you from that day.
Kara, it does. I'm watching you and have just seen the clips that Jamie was talking about. The idea of a conspiracy is totally inaccurate. I can testify that firsthand. And seeing the airplane fly into the building reminds me of friends, good kids who were in the watch center that morning: Bobby Dolan, Larry Getzfred, Danny Schanauer, and a couple dozen more.
Now, your classmate from the Navy and flight school friend was the captain of that flight, Chick Burlingame, right?
Correct. Captain Chick Burlingame, American Airlines. I went to school with him, lived next door to him for 4 years at Annapolis, Kira, and went through flight school in Pensacola and Kingsville, Texas. Chick was a very good friend.
You know what kind of man he was and what kind of pilot he was. I know you could never put us into the mindset of what he was probably going through, but I have no doubt you're going to tell me he was extremely strong-willed and quite a brave sailor.
I've wondered since that morning when we learned, all of us who were classmates at Chick's, that he was on that airplane, what the terrorists had to do to get him out of that cockpit. I was in a plebe summer boxing match with Chick, and he pounded me. I don't like admitting that on national media, but Chick was really tough. And the terrorists had to perform some inhumane act to get him out of that cockpit, I guarantee you.
And you had 24 men and women, or more than 24 men and women under you. You lost 24 of your own while working in the Pentagon. You had to deal with a lot of those families after this happened, didn't you?
Yeah, it was heartbreaking, Kara. These were young men and women who were on watch. And those were 24 that were down at the command center. Navy lost almost up to 50 sailors and civilians, and Army, remember, lost 35 more than that. So between the Army and the Navy, there were over 100 families who lost their loved one that morning.
Do you think it's a good idea that we're looking at this video, that we're seeing this, and that it has been released?
Well, it's easy enough for me to say, Kira, because I knew those folks, but they weren't directly related to me, though I'd been with them just that morning. I'm sure that this will cause those families who for example, Chick Burlingame's brothers and sister, it will be painful for them. But my experience with these folks is that they don't want to hide anything. They want to confront the reality that we're in the global war on terror head on, and so they'll accept it for what it's worth.
My final question, just looking at this video, reminds me of just the war in Iraq. You were in charge of that air campaign, shock and awe. You knew why you had to do what you had to do, whether it was Afghanistan or Iraq. No doubt you look at that video and you try to keep focused on the overall war and terror.
To be sure, Kira, these are the folks who are trying to win this war. We're fighting them all around the globe, and the video reminds us that we can't ever let our guard down here in the United States or anyplace else. It's an asymmetric war, and they're going to come at us any way they can, and that's what we're here at Northern Command doing, is protecting the men and women in America and Canada and Mexico against similar attacks.
Admiral Timothy Keating, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kira.
And it was indeed a day that changed all of our lives and our country. Now new pictures obtained by Fox News of the plane hitting the Pentagon on September the 11th, that riveting tape. And it was a day that changed all of us and changed our country. Coming up, we're going to show you the new images that had just been released as the plane hit the Pentagon on September 11th. Reliving the horrors of September 11th as new images of the deadly attack have just been released today. That story coming up at the top of the hour on Studio B with Shepard Smith.
The news begins anew on Studio B, reliving 9/11. The new video from that horrific day, the government releasing security tapes from the Pentagon that it says shows the nose cone of American Airlines Flight 77, a blur, then a fireball. Today, why the tapes are being released and how the victims' relatives are reacting. Tuesday afternoon, it's noon in the West, 3 p.m. in Washington, where the government has just released a never-before publicly seen video of American Airlines Flight 77 purported to hit the Pentagon on 9/11. The attack killed 184 people in the building and on the plane. The Defense Department claimed that it could not release the footage because of the Zacarias Moussaoui investigation. But a federal lawsuit has finally forced the tape's release. From Studio B, let's get right to Brett Baer on Fox Top Story. Brett?
Hey, Shep, this is coming out because of a Judicial Watch Freedom of Information Act request at first, and then a lawsuit, as you mentioned, that followed that. The Pentagon saying now that the Zacarias Moussaoui trial is over, they can release these tapes. There are 2 tapes, 2 minutes long each. They're 2 security camera angles. We'll take a look at the first one. This is the new one, an angle that you have not seen before. As you look at this, you can see the Pentagon. This is on 9/11, and then you'll see on the right side of your screen what appears to be, and Pentagon officials say, is the nose cone of American Airlines Flight 97 right there. And then you'll see a blur and then the explosion into the Pentagon. The second camera that you'll see from is the same angle that we've seen before from the released stills that we obtained, Fox News obtained in 2002. Again, a wider camera angle, and you'll see again on the right side of your screen a white flash that is the plane, and then since it's a security camera, every half second or so the frames move on and then you see the explosion into the building. Now, Pentagon officials say the reason that they withheld this was because it was part of the investigation into Zacarias Moussaoui. People, conspiracy theorists all over the world didn't believe that. They have continued to post various websites saying that there was no plane, something the Pentagon officials and many others say is obviously ludicrous. We talked to numerous family and friends of the 184 people who perished that day, not only in the Pentagon but on the plane. They say this is a tough day for them, but one that they say finally puts to rest, or should, all of these conspiracy theorists that say there was not a plane.
Of course, you don't see much, Brett, there. Are there any more? Is this it? Do we know?
This is it, according to the Pentagon. That's all they have. Judicial Watch was also looking at getting a camera angle from the Sheraton Hotel across the street, the Citgo gas station, and also the Virginia Department of Transportation. But apparently those angles did not pan out. The Virginia Department of Transportation does have a camera that looks that very direction, but there's no recording device on that. It's a live camera for traffic monitoring. So these could be the only tapes of American Flight 77 into the Pentagon.
Let's look at that second tape again, Brett. You mentioned what looks like a white puff of smoke, sort of a linear-looking thing along the grass that the producers tell me. On the right-hand side of your screen, there'll be a circle and then a little white puff of smoke. Goes without saying that they have conducted extensive analysis thereof. What are they saying this is right here?
Yeah, they're saying that that is the plane itself, the fuselage, the plane hit the nose cone there, and then the rest of the plane hitting the ground and then hitting the Pentagon. In the closer angle, actually, you see the nose cone a little bit better, and it's very grainy, as you can see, the security camera, but the closer angle, you can actually get a sense that that is the nose cone, and some of the clearer images that haven't been dubbed down a couple times, you can almost make out the lines on the plane itself, showing that it is an American Airlines flight. So the Pentagon saying that this is all they have as far as proof that this is a plane, but also all the people inside and all of the pieces of the plane that were recovered afterwards, including one that Secretary Rumsfeld himself recovered from the crash site that day.
Not surprisingly, Brett, I got an email in the middle of your last discussion there from some guy named Larry who says what hit the Pentagon was a military aircraft lined with explosives and flown in by remote via Global Hawk technology. Is the Pentagon concerned about any of this sort of thing, and are they worried that these conspiracy theories might flourish as a result of this?
No, not at all. I mean, they say this is what we have. We know it was American Airlines Flight 77. We know the people on board that plane perished. We know that it went off the radar. We know that it crashed into this building. They call these conspiracy theorists ludicrous. They say there's no hard proof other than these two cameras that what hit the Pentagon is, in fact, that plane.
Brett Baer live at the Pentagon. Brett, thanks for that.
4 p.m. here in Washington, where a long-sought video of that deadly day has just been released. We'll examine what it shows and why it's finally out. Also this hour. Right now, a watchdog group here in Washington says it's hoping some conspiracy theories about 9/11 will finally be put to rest. Just a short while ago, the federal government gave that group what it wanted: the release of video showing American Airlines Flight 77 striking the Pentagon. Let's bring in our senior Pentagon correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. He's been going through this video frame by frame by frame. Jamie?
Well, Wolf, the videotapes released today by the U.S. government have been held in evidence for the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui. In fact, they were shown at the trial. But once Moussaoui was sentenced, the government could no longer hold on to them under the Freedom of Information Act. They released them as a result of a lawsuit by the judicial watchdog group, Judicial Watch. The videos are essentially a more complete version of 5 still frames that CNN obtained back in 2002 from a Pentagon security camera that shows the only images seen so far of American Airlines Flight 77 crashing into the side of the Pentagon. The problem with the original video was that it was only a single frame that showed the plane, and it was so indistinct that it helped fuel conspiracy theories on the internet and around the world, questioning whether something else hit the Pentagon, like, for instance, a cruise missile. Of course, well, that's nonsense given all the evidence we have about what really happened on September 11th. But nevertheless, the fact that the government held on to these videotapes helped fuel that conspiracy. Now 2 different versions have been released, both from the same Pentagon checkpoint, but from 2 slightly different angles. In one, you can see what appears to be the nose of the plane just entering the frame. The other one, a little bit lower angle, shows what appears to be the fuselage whipping by just above the ground level and before it slams into the Pentagon. Again, both of these tapes now posted on the Pentagon's website and are part of the public domain, and they remain at this point the only images of American Airlines Flight 77 crashing into the Pentagon.
And the reason it was delayed all this time releasing this video is because they didn't want to interfere with the Zacarias Moussaoui trial. Is that right?
Well, it had been confiscated by the Justice Department, held as evidence, and there were 2 arguments. One is that they might need it as evidence. The other, that the release publicly could prejudice the jury in the trial. Of course, that question is moot now that the sentencing is complete.
All right. Jamie's going to be back in the next hour here in the Situation Room with another report and more information. Jamie, thank you very much.
The Justice Department released the tapes in response to a Freedom of Information lawsuit filed by the legal watchdog group Judicial Watch.
Well, we wanted to help put to rest conspiracy theories suggesting it was something other than a plane that hit the Pentagon, that it was a missile or a decoy of some type.
Until now, this single frame was the only image that showed the jetliner before it hit the Pentagon. And the image is so indistinct that it helped fuel conspiracy theories that abound on the internet, despite pictures of the wreckage and eyewitness accounts.
I looked off, looked out my window, I saw this plane, a jet, American Airlines jet coming, and I thought, this doesn't add up, it's really low.
The websites often take statements out of context, such as this exchange from CNN, in which I, myself, appear to be questioning whether a plane really hit the building.
But from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon.
Wolf, in fact, I was answering a question about an eyewitness account that a plane had crashed short of the Pentagon, and I was making the point that no, not near the Pentagon. The only plane that crashed was at the Pentagon. Wolf?
Jamie, thank you. And that video is difficult for many of us to watch, all the more so for those closest to the Pentagon tragedy. Let's turn to our Brian Todd. He's been speaking to some family members. Brian?
Wolf, today, in fact, I spoke to 3 relatives of Flight 77 victims. They've all been public figures since September 11th. But as you'll see with one of them, any new image of that day makes it feel like yesterday.
Many years
Beforehand, Rosemary Dillard had no hesitation about viewing the tape. When she saw it, the pain returned.
You can see it just going further and further into the building itself. Then it hurts. It really hurts. And it hurts to think that all those people, both in the building and on the airplane, suffered.
Dillard's husband, Eddie, was on board American Airlines Flight 77, heading to L.A. to look at a property they'd just bought. She believes he was seated in the same row as some of the hijackers and thinks he was killed before impact.
Does that give you any solace at all to think that maybe by this instant he might have been out of pain?
I wanted to hug him again. I wanted to hold him again. And I wanted him to hold me. And that'll never happen. So no, it doesn't give me any solace.
But Dillard views this with more than a widow's grief. She worked at American Airlines for 29 years, was a base manager for flight attendants, knew several others on board.
I don't know, it brings back a lot of emotions, a lot of emotions. It really hurts.
Dillard's heard all the conspiracy theories too, stories circulating the internet about a missile hitting the Pentagon that Jamie alluded to earlier. She doesn't think this release will put an end to those, and she wants other tapes reported to have recorded the crash and been confiscated by the government to be released. She says she can go through this again if it will help put some more pieces together about September 11th. Wolf?
Brian, thank you for that. And coming up, we'll take you in.
Good evening. All these years later, it still doesn't take much to bring back how this nation felt as the smoke from 9/11 was still rising. While live television coverage that morning was fixed on 2 buildings here in New York, word came from the Pentagon that an awful explosion had rocked that massive. Before long, we saw the fireball and smoke from 36,000 pounds of jet fuel. All of the souls on board American Airlines Flight 77, along with more than 100 inside the building, were gone in an instant. Tonight, the federal government has responded to a request to release the security camera pictures from that day. They offer a new view of the worst day in modern American history. We begin here tonight with the correspondent who was on duty for us at the Pentagon that morning, Jim Miklashevsky. Jim, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. This was our vantage point for weeks after 9/11. American Flight 77 flew into the Pentagon right behind us. Now, the moment of impact was captured by Pentagon surveillance cameras that were stationed off to the left, but the 2 videos weren't released until today. At precisely 9:37, 2 security cameras were rolling when the airliner slammed into the Pentagon, killing 189 people. In this newly released video, one camera captures what Pentagon officials say is the nose of the 757 less than a heartbeat before impact, sending a ball of flames shooting into the sky. From a second camera slightly further away, you see a Pentagon police car pass through a security gate. A few frames later, a larger portion of the fuselage can be seen, but traveling at 530 miles per hour, the plane is only a blur. Loaded with 36,000 pounds of jet fuel, the flying bomb created a tremendous blast that could be felt way on the other side of the Pentagon, where I was reporting live on the Today Show. Katie, I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently it felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon. The surveillance videos were used recently in the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, convicted Al-Qaeda terrorist and 9/11 conspirator. They were finally released today under the Freedom of Information Act. For years, conspiracy theorists have claimed there was a government cover-up, that a U.S. missile, not a plane, struck the Pentagon. But the co-chair of the 9/11 Commission says the evidence was irrefutable.
Just overwhelming evidence that it was an airplane that struck the Pentagon and not a missile.
Still, the blurry, unidentifiable images released today may do little to silence the claims of conspiracy. And there are still more claims that the U.S. government is withholding other surveillance videos, but Pentagon and Justice Department officials insist that the horrific videos released today are the last. Brian.
And Jim, before you go, why did it take as long as it did for this series of pictures to be released today?
Well, the Pentagon initially turned these videos over to the FBI for its initial investigation, and then after the Moussaoui trial was completed, the Justice Department acceded to Freedom of Information and a lawsuit to gain access to those videos.
Thanks for that, Jim. Jim Miklaszewski on duty for us again tonight at the Pentagon.
Ground slams into the southwest side of the building, vanishing in a fireball. Back to the top now in freeze frame. That thin white streak on the right is all that's seen of American Flight 77. It carried 130 people, including 5 hijackers. 59 more people died inside the Pentagon, 189 in all. Some of the frames from the video were previously leaked and circulated as stills on the internet. The video, which was shown at the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, was released today over Pentagon objections in response to a Freedom of Information Act request.
Today in Washington, we got to see new images of American Airlines Flight 77 crashing into the Pentagon on September 11th. 189 people were killed. A watchdog group sought the video to convince conspiracy theorists who have long speculated that something other than a plane slammed into that building that morning. Here's ABC's Lisa Stark.
At first glance, it's hard to make out the images taken by the Pentagon security camera that morning. But look closely at the lower right-hand corner. This video, released today, appears to show the nose of an airplane. It comes into view briefly. The next few frames show the Pentagon in flames. That adds to images that have already been seen from another security camera 10 feet away. A white streak in the lower right-hand corner, then the explosion.
We hope this completes the historical record and makes it clear these folks were the victims of a murderous terrorist attack.
Judicial Watch, a government watchdog group, sued for the video to try to quiet conspiracy theorists who have questioned the Pentagon attack.
The photos show no cabin, no engines, and no tail.
The theorists have talked of a cruise missile or a drone hitting the building, of a government cover-up of the true origins of the 9/11 attacks. They say the new video does not put their questions to rest.
Why did it take 4.5 years to release more ambiguous frames that still do not prove the government's case definitively?
Now, some family members of those who died here at the Pentagon say they are outraged at the conspiracy theorists, and Judicial Watch says anyone who doesn't believe that American Airlines Flight 77 hit this building is, in its words, crazy. Elizabeth?
All right, Lisa Stark at the Pentagon.
Well, most Americans have seen the September 11th video of jets slicing into the Twin Towers. Who could forget it? Few have seen, however, graphic images of a plane slamming into the Pentagon. That has fed conspiracy theories. Today, following a lawsuit demanding their disclosure, U.S. authorities released 2 videos showing exactly what happened. CNN senior Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre tonight with the tape, keeping them honest.
Here's the video released today of American Airlines Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon at 9:38 a.m. on September 11th. Here it is from another angle. Hard to know what you're seeing, right? Let's look at it frame by frame. The 2 videos from Pentagon security cameras show how low and fast the plane came in. On the first, the nose of the 757 can be seen entering the frame just a few feet above the ground. The next frame shows the fiery explosion. On the second video, the plane appears as just a white streak before impact. The videos show what eyewitnesses described, an airliner flying so low it sheared off light posts, as if it's being brought in for a landing before exploding in a massive fireball. The tapes were sealed for the criminal trial of 9/11 conspirator Zacarias Moussaoui, But with his sentencing, the Justice Department released them in response to lawsuits, including one from the legal watchdog group Judicial Watch.
Well, we wanted to help put to rest conspiracy theories suggesting it was something other than a plane that hit the Pentagon, that it was a missile or a decoy of some type.
Until now, this single frame was the only image that showed the jetliner before it hit the Pentagon. And the image is so indistinct that it helped fuel conspiracy theories that abound on the internet, despite pictures of the wreckage and eyewitness accounts.
I looked off, looked out my window, I saw this plane, a jet, American Airlines jet coming, and I thought, this doesn't add up, it's really low.
The websites often take statements out of context, such as this exchange from CNN, in which I, myself, appear to be questioning whether a plane really hit the building.
But from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon.
In fact, I was talking about an eyewitness who thought the plane landed short of the Pentagon, and went on to say the only crash site was at the Pentagon.
The only site is the actual site of the building that's crashed in. And
in fact, there were thousands of tiny pieces of the plane, and I personally photographed a piece of the fuselage and what appeared to be part of the cockpit.
The video isn't clear enough to convince the most ardent conspiracy theorists, and there's still some mystery that surrounds the day. For instance, what happened to video from a hotel security camera nearby that sources tell CNN caught at least part of the attack? No one in the government even acknowledges that tape exists. Jamie McIntyre, CNN, The Pentagon.
Well, she was jogging 1 minute, dragged to...
Impact segment tonight, seeing the impact of 9/11 almost 5 years after the fact. Today, the Defense Department released 2 videos showing American Airlines Flight 77 striking the Pentagon after being hijacked by terrorists. The watchdog group Judicial Watch filed a Freedom of Information Act request that forced the release of the video. Joining us now from Washington, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Why did you want the video released?
Well, we wanted to help put to rest conspiracy theories out there that were suggesting a cruise missile hit the Pentagon, the government murdered the airline passengers on Flight 77. Really outrageous stuff. And one of the reasons that these conspiracy theories were being fueled was because the government hadn't released allegedly a video of the airplane striking the Pentagon. We said, well, let's get that video released, and so we sought this video about 1.5 years ago.
Now, why did the government resist your request at first? You had to file the FOIA Act. Why did they resist?
Well, you know, the government just doesn't like to release information generally, and then they used the excuse that they were planning to use the video perhaps in the Zacarias Moussaoui trial. We said that wasn't sufficient. We filed a lawsuit. Long and short of it is they waited till after the trial was over and he was convicted and sentenced, and they released the video to us today.
Okay, now we're watching the video here, we've seen the pictures, and it doesn't seem to me, watching these pictures, that this shows anything more than an explosion. It does prove the plane, of course, crashed into the Pentagon. Most rational people did believe that, but there's nothing more to it, is there, or am I missing something?
Well, I think if you look at it carefully and look at it in even slower motion than the videos indicate, you'll see what looks like a passenger airliner hitting the Pentagon. And just having the videos released, though, is important, Bill, because the conspiracy theorists said, well, the government's hiding something by not releasing the videos. Now they're out there, and that's one more leg of the conspiracy theory that's been knocked out as a result.
Do you believe that these tapes have any other wider implications? See, debunking the nuts, I understand, you know, but nobody really takes them seriously. Is there anything else we can learn from this?
Well, too many take them seriously, and I think they serve, though, additionally as useful reminders as to the evil terrorists we're facing. It puts a capstone on the historical record, and it reminds Americans of exactly what we're facing in terms of what terrorists are willing to do. That's a plane full of passengers hitting a building full of innocents, and it's a noteworthy reminder of what we faced on September 11th and what we continue to face in terms of threats today.
All right, Mr. Fitton, thanks very much. We appreciate it.